Hi, hello, I'm Sam Harrison. I read, review and discuss fantasy and science fiction books. Today we have a discussion for you, which is a wrap-up of every single series that I have read and where I am in that series and whether I'm going to be continuing. So what we're going to do first is we're going to run through the series that I am going to be continuing, and then we'll go through the ones that I might continue, the ones that I have DNFed, and then we'll go finally to the series that I have shelved. So these are books where I know I want to finish, but I have put them way into the future. Some of them behind things like my Wheel of Time project, for example. So speaking of Wheel of Time, let's go straight into it and talk about the Wheel of Time. So I'm looking down at my notes here, so I apologise, there's a lot of looking down in this video. So starting off with the Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan. This is a 14 book series, I believe. I know there's a prequel novel, which I think makes it 14. I intend to read the prequel novel as well. I'll be reading it in publication order, not the order that is suggested online, because that's the way that people read it originally, and I feel like, you know. So I have read one book in the Wheel of Time. I have bought the next two. Apologies in advance, I'm not going to be holding up books, and if I have time I will edit the covers so they're sliding in for the series, or like some artwork, but this is unfortunately going to be mostly me talking at you, so if you want to, you know, listen to this like a podcast, you're more than welcome. Wheel of Time. I really enjoyed the first book. I actually was expecting to like trudge through it and, you know, have to like work to enjoy it, and then the next book would be where I like truly got into it. But I actually was super into the Eye of the World. So people telling me that The Great Hunt is one of the best books in the series is a 4x improvement on The Eye of the World has me very excited. Next up, we have the book series that I started this month, the Sun Eater series by Christopher Rocchio. There are 6 books in the Sun Eater series so far. I think there's planned to be 7, with another one potentially releasing at the end of the year. That's what I heard on Mike's book reviews, but, you know, who's to say? I have read one book and one novella in the Sun Eater series, and I enjoyed them both. I preferred currently the novella, although I might change my mind on that once I've read more of the series and see where everything goes. Now, I will be continuing Sun Eater. I have the next book, which I believe is Howling Dark, and that is going to be read in February, depending on a book workload, etc. But the plan is February. Obviously I'll be continuing this series. Next up, we have another book series that I started this year, which is Red Rising. So there are 6 books in the Red Rising series, with a 7th book on the way, currently being written. I believe that it's slated for next year. No official date, but I think that's just when people are expecting it to come out. I have read one book in the Red Rising series twice, Red Rising. I will be reading Golden Sun. When I read that, I'm not 100% sure. It's just going to have to fit in with my other reading, because I kind of didn't plan to read the Red Rising series this year, and then I got gifted the entire series for Christmas. So because of that, I will be reading it, and it's just kind of a matter of when I have time. Like you saw in November when I was reading the Skyward books, I had tons of extra reading time. That'll be probably the times when I slot in books from Red Rising. Although I did talk to JCM Byrne, author of the Hybrid Helix series, about maybe doing some spoiler discussions on Red Rising, so that could be really exciting. It'd be great to get a chance to chat to Joe. Now, obviously I'll be continuing that one. Empire, let's go. I don't want to miss out any, so I'm going to go back to my list. So the first ever fantasy series that I read was the Rift War Cycle by Raymond E. Feist. Magician was the book that sparked my love of fantasy. I bought it to take on a foreign holiday, because when I used to go on holiday was when I got most of my books when I was a teenager. And my mum would say she would give me a limit of number of books, not price of books. So I picked Magician because it was massive. It was like 800 pages or something. But I devoured it in like 3 or 4 days. And I started reading it again on this holiday after I'd read all my other books, because they were all much, much shorter. And Magician just really lit a fire in me and a love for fantasy, which is kind of why I eventually came back to reading through fantasy with Brandon Sanderson. Now, the Rift War cycle has 30 books. I have read I think I read almost 10. So I didn't touch any of the Janny Wirtz co-written books, which I really want to read after reading Curse of the Mistwraith, despite my feelings on Curse of the Mistwraith, of course. I would really like to read more in that series. I don't know whether I feel like I would need to reread the opening books again now. I'd be tempted to reread Magician, because I have read it, I think 3 times in my lifetime. So I read it twice, basically back to back, and then I read it once again at university. So I'd be interested in reading it again, but we will see. I'm not even going to touch it until I finish Wheel of Time, because my rule for Wheel of Time is that I can only read trilogies at the same time as Wheel of Time. Anything else, I'm not touching it. But I would like to continue someday. So maybe this should be in the shelved category, but yeah, but maybe this one is a shelved one, actually. Okay, next up, we have the Shadowbinders Trilogy by Andrew Watson. I read book 1, Harbinger of Justice, in December, and I actually had a interview with Andrew afterwards, my first author interview on the channel, which was really exciting. I had a great time chatting with Andrew. Absolutely lovely bloke, and even if he wasn't a lovely bloke, I would be continuing the Shadowbinders Trilogy, because it felt like something really different and interesting. I'm not reading books that feel like Shadowbinders, if that makes sense. I'm not reading that kind of desert setting, that's a kind of small and intricate cast of characters. So I'm really excited to get on to the next book, when I think he says it's coming out this year. And there is a novella, Silence is Silver, I believe, that's also coming out this year. So you best believe I'll be reading both of those on release if I can. Next up, Empire of the Wolf. I've read 1 book. There are 3 books. I am continuing this series. I'm continuing this series this month. So I got really distracted last week by a new video game. So I barely read any of Prophet of Adan. I am almost halfway through now. And I would imagine I will be finishing in a couple of days. Unfortunately, not in time for the Wednesday review video slot. But we'll see what we can do, guys. I'll see if I can do something. The Empire of the Wolf is absolutely fantastic. Book 1 was my number 2 read of 2023, not counting Harbinger of Justice, which I read afterwards. I think Empire of the Wolf was the last book that counted for the ranking. Yeah. Empire of the Wolf, Tyranny of Faith was the first book. Was it the first book? I'm not sure, actually. No, it wasn't the first book. Tyranny of Faith is book 2, which I'm reading this month. Book of the Halt. So I actually don't know how many books Book of the Halt is going to be. This is the series by Bradley P. Bowyer, which is starts with the Dragons of Deepwood Fen, which I got a early review copy of last year. Absolutely loved. Really fantastic world. I love the elements of kind of more modern problems. Like they have a drug trade problem in the Book of the Halt, and I thought that was really interesting to get to see that modern problem in the fantasy setting, but not be urban fantasy. So I'm really looking forward to reading the next book in that series, Don't know when it's out, although there will be a novella this year, which I am desperate to read. I'm really excited for. Next up is the Skyward series. So the Skyward series is complete. I have completed that book series. I'm fully up to date. There is a sequel series coming called Skyward Legacy, which I will read the first book of to see how that feels. The previous Jancy Patterson books took a while to kind of warm up and get good. I feel like she didn't really nail the series until the final novella. But if she can take the skill that she's got from that final novella into the first book of Skyward Legacy, I'll definitely read it. I do, however, wish that it kind of was more accurate to the Legacy name and it was set a bit further in the future. Anyway, the Cosmere up next. The Cosmere, there's a lot of novels in the Cosmere and I didn't count them. Probably should have. But am I up to date? Kind of. So I have read all of the Cosmere except for the very first entry, Elantris. I don't know why. I think I put it off because it didn't really connect to anything when I was doing my initial read of the Cosmere, and then I've just kind of never come back to it because people say it's Brandon's worst book. Now, Elantris, I am excited to read, and I'm going to read it before Wind and Truth comes out. You can hold me to that. Even if it is the month before, I will read it before Wind and Truth comes out. But at the moment, I'm not super hyped to read it, if that makes sense. Will I continue with the Cosmere? I've already bought the next book, Wind and Truth. So, yes, of course I will be continuing. Also, this whole section is yeses, so you might have worked that out. The next series is The Bound and the Broken, which is not completed. However, I am fully up to date. I've read all the novellas. I've read all the novels. There's 2 more novels to come out in the series, one at the end of this year and one with no defined date. There'll be also a novella in between. I love The Bound and the Broken. I think I would probably say it's my favourite fantasy series of all time. Of course, I'll be continuing. Hybrid Helix by J.C. Ember, and this is a science fiction superhero space opera series. I've read book 1 in September last year. I'm reading book 2, which is called The Return of the Griffin, next. So literally, as soon as I finish Prophet of Adan, I will be reading... I do also have a physical copy, but it's just not to hand. I will be reading The Return of the Griffin. I'm really excited to get to this one. I'm itching to get back into the sci-fi. I really want to get back into this world and spend more time with Rohan. I think there's very little for me to say about this series apart from that I really like it so far from one book, and I'm excited to see where it goes because there's so much potential in that first book of different storylines they could go through. Dresden Files, 17 books in this series. It is not complete. There's at least 8 books left to go, I think. However, am I up to date? Kind of. So I've read all the mainline books, but I have not read the novella, The Law, which was released direct to Kindle Unlimited last year, or maybe the year before. I haven't read it. I have heard it isn't very good, so like Elantris, I've not been rushing out to read it. I think that once the next Dresden project is announced, I'll probably read it. This isn't shelved because I'm basically up to date, but it could almost be because I haven't read The Law yet. Bloodsworn Saga by John Gwynne. This is an awesome series and has made me really, really want to read its other work. However, Wheel of Time takes precedence for the time being. The Bloodsworn Saga is kind of this Norse mythology inspired epic fantasy, which is dark and kind of gritty, but not too like, it doesn't feel grim. It just feels dark, if that makes sense. So really enjoyed the first 2 books in this series that I read basically back to back, and cannot wait for the third one. We have no release date for it yet, but as soon as that book comes out, I will be reading that one, either buying myself a copy or requesting an ARC, because I'm super excited. Next up, so this is a one that I almost didn't include, but this is Berserk by Kentaro Miura. Multiple people have commented on the fact that I have a Berserk t-shirt, and that's why I decided to add this one in. Also, I had 29 series before then. That's, so Berserk. I have read Berserk Deluxe 1, 2, and 3. I think that the Berserk is fantastic. That is beyond grimdark. That is like edgelord almost territory. But everything I've read so far has been fantastic. I haven't gone back to it because the Berserk Deluxes were incredibly hard to find. And eventually I decided to give up and just start reading digitally, and sold my Berserk Deluxes to help pay for the digital copies. But I haven't yet gone back to the series. If you'd be interested in a Berserk read-along for the channel, maybe I could add Berserk in place of one of the weekly review slots. I don't know. I'm not especially in love with that as an idea, like doing Manga Monday or something like that. I still primarily want the channel to be about novel reading. I do like to sprinkle in some comic book stuff every now and then, because I read a lot of comics and nobody on BookTube talks about them. So this is a long way of saying I really like Berserk. I've read 3 volumes out of 14, I think. The series is kind of completed. The kind of part also makes me not want to, rush to finish it off. Next up, Night Angel. So this is a fantasy trilogy by Brent Weeks that I read in my early 20s. I read it as it came out, weirdly, even though I was not reading at the time at all. But I would read one book a year at that point, and it would take me the whole year to read it. Whereas Night Angel, I obsessively read those books on trains for all 3 of them, because they came out 1 month after the other. It was a really cool time to be into that series. Now, there has since been released a new book in that series called Night Angel Nemesis, which I haven't read. So now there's 4 books. I was complete and I was up to date, but now there's a new book. I would like to read it, but don't know. At the moment, no huge rush. So would like to read it. Probably will read it this year. No huge rush currently. Next up, Rivers of London. So this one is a 9-book series, which is by Ben Aronovich. It is basically, it's kind of like Doctor Who mixed with Dresden Files, set in London. So you're following Detective Peter Grant as he works as an apprentice under the last of the Queen's wizards, who is called Inspector Nightingale, and he basically solves magic crimes in London. I read the first 3 books and loved them. This is, again, when I wasn't really reading, but I voraciously read these. And then the 4th book completely lost me. I don't know why, but it just really, really lost me, and I DNFed it. And I would love to go back to that series at some point. It is a long series, which is another reason why I'm not 100% kind of sold on putting that in with Wheel of Time. So it might be one that gets left long term. But I do like it. I do want to return to it. Maybe we'll try and fit one in the first half of this year. Reckoners by Brandon Sanderson. This is the last time you'll see Sanderson on this list. So Reckoners is a superhero sci-fi by Brandon Sanderson. I've read the first book, Steelheart, and I loved it. I read it in a single sitting. I was on a coach to France to go to Disneyland Paris with my wife, and I read the entire book start to finish while on this coach. Absolutely loved it. It was a long coach journey. Absolutely loved it. And I never got to the next book because it wasn't out at the time, and I was not reading the way that I read now. Now they're all out. I should go back and read the rest of the trilogy because there's only 2 more books, but don't know when that's going to happen. That is all of the yeses. So these are all the series that I'm 100% loving that I'm going to carry on. So let's talk about some maybes. Up next, I have Mortal Techniques by Rob J. Hayes. So I really enjoyed Never Die. by Rob J. Hayes, which was the first book in that series I read during Self-Pub September. I might come back to that series for Self-Pub September this year if I do that experiment again, although I don't really need to because I'm just going to read a load of Self-Pub this year. But I'm cautiously interested in reading more. I felt by the end of that book that I kind of didn't need to see more of that universe. I felt like I'd had like a really good tour. I met some interesting characters, but knowing that all the books are standalone has, again, it removes a little bit of the impetus for me for reading more in that series. I've heard that series is excellent, and but most people say that Never Die is the best book, which again gives me less impetus to read more. So really, really weird one, this one, which is why I've put it in the maybes. I do really, really want to read the next series by Rob J. Hayes, God Eater, which comes out in March. I've tentatively put that on the TBR, but we'll see. Okay, so here's an interesting one. And this is one that you get, this is probably one of the more controversial things in this list, which is A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. So there are currently 6 books. It's not completed. It definitely won't be completed. However, there is a chance that George will release the next book, Winds of Winter. Here's the question, though, is whether I will read it. And I'm not sure. I feel like we've been having diminishing returns on the last 2 books in the series. I felt, in particular, A Dance with Dragons was much, much poorer quality than the rest of the series. So if the book is going to be of Dance of Dragons quality, maybe not. This one will be one that I'm going to probably decide when it's released, whether I'm going to dive in on release day and try and be a part of the zeitgeist, or whether I'm going to wait for some early reviews. Three Body Problem by Shichin Liu. Shichin Liu? Yes, Shichin Liu. I'm unsure whether I'm going to read more in this series. I did not like the Three Body Problem, and I think that I ended up giving it a 2-star rating. Maybe a 3-star in the video review, but I think since I've revisited my thoughts on it and changed it to a 2-star. People say the next book in this series is amazing and is a massive improvement, but currently how much I dislike the first book has given me no impetus to read the next. Hence, that's why it's it's not a no, because I am intrigued by what the next book could be, but it is definitely not a priority in any shape or form. Next up, Cradle by Will White. So Cradle is a progression fantasy series by Will White with a kind of martial arts sort of bend to it. I read book 1 and loved it. I started reading book 2 straight away and I hated the opening to book 2. I felt like it was dragging and I was really bored. So I DNF'd that book. DNF/shelved, I don't know really. I stopped reading it. And I don't know whether I'm ever going to return to it. The series is complete with 12 books, but again, just don't know if I'm interested in going back, to be honest. I think maybe that kind of martial arts adjacent setting isn't what I like in books. I think I prefer it in films, which is why Never Die also, the Mortal Techniques also is kind of on the bubble here, but we will see. Next up, there's one more series in the maybe pile, which I read before BookTube, and this is many years before BookTube. So I watched the series Shadow and Bone on Netflix, and I loved it. Season 1, I loved it, and when I loved it, I was like, I'm going to read the book to see how different it was. Not very different, apart from that. Huge one whole plotline isn't in the book, basically. It's from the sequel series. So I read the first book and I really enjoyed it. And I started reading the second book. And then as I was not, as I say, into reading in the same way I am now, I just didn't finish it. So maybe I will go back to that one day. It would be nice to see where that story goes because the Netflix show got cancelled. So I guess we'll see. No plans to read it anywhere near soon. It is a YA series, which is again one of those things that I'm not a big YA guy. So it's not pulling me in to read it, but we'll see. Okay, we're into the nose column now. So the nose... Oh, should I read the shelved ones? We're going to go for shelved. So these are books that I definitely am continuing. They're yeses, but they're ones that are far in the future. No plans to read probably this year. So the most controversial one of these is going to be Realm of the Elderlings by Robin Hobb. So I love the Farseer trilogy. Then I read Ship of Magic and I thought it was even better than the Farseer trilogy. And we're talking about, this is... Ship of Magic is almost as close to the 6-star of War and Ruin experience I had with Ryan Carhill's books, the latest book. But I'm not reading it while I'm reading Wheel of Time, and that's going to take me a year and a bit. So, yeah, that's basically the whole reason. Very, very boring to talk about it this way, in that I love this series, but I cannot read 2 14-book series at a time. And I think Elderlings is 16 books. Next up, Area X by Jeff Vandermeer. So this is a book that I really enjoyed the movie Annihilation. So I bought the book. Same thing that happened with the Grishaverse. But I didn't actually finish the book. I got most of the way through and then put it down and just never picked it back up. Again, this is pre-reading obsession. I would say that this series is currently shelved, although this and the next series have some potential to come back in this year, because I would like to read some more sci-fi that isn't maybe space opera stuff, and Area X is that. Threadlight is my final shelved series. So I started reading Threadlight in Self-Pub September. It's, I think, the only book that I've started reading while doing the channel that I haven't finished. I shelved it so that I could get on to my October reading, because it was a lot of chunky big books and I didn't want to get behind on those plans for October. And then it just kind of hasn't fit in again since. I've bought the audiobook though, and I will be listening to it when I have space for a fantasy audiobook, say when I'm reading a sci-fi that doesn't have a audiobook. Yeah, I think that I was really struggling with Threadlight because it just wasn't what I was in the mood for at the time. I definitely do want to read it though, and what I read was very good. So Threadlight coming at some point, maybe this year, because as I said before, I'd like to read more self-pub this year. So cross your fingers, might be this year. That is all of the shelved books, and now we're into my last 4, which are my no's. And this is a difficult one. Wait. We missed one. We missed one in the yeses. Apologies. We missed the Adan Trilogy. I'm currently reading book 2, reading book 3, sometime very soon. Really like this series. Not too much to go into too much depth about this because I talk about it a lot. But you guys know this series is good. Into the no's. So we're going to go with probably the least surprising no for you guys, which is Wars of Light and Shadow by Janny Wirtz. This is the closest. This is one of the no's that was almost a shelved / maybe. But I feel like I really didn't get on with that first book, and it took me a very long time to read and put me quite behind on my videos, to be honest, which is why I'm not 100% sure I want to read the next one. If I do end up reading the next one, it will be much, much, much further down the line. We're talking post Wheel of Time, post Elderlings, post Malazan, probably. So once I've gotten through the 3 other kind of big mega series for fantasy that people love, then maybe I will come back to Curse of the Mistwraith, and my reading skill and comprehension and just overall everything will have improved. And also the Curse of the Mistwraith audiobook has just been announced, so maybe by then I will be able to also listen to the audiobooks, which does help me with reading big chunky books like this sometimes. Murderbot Diaries is the other controversial hit here. So, the Murderbot Diaries, I've explained a few times before that I feel like the books are just too samey for me to want to continue reading them. The series isn't complete, and I think I read 5 books in the series, and I don't have any interest in reading anymore, honestly. Next up, Alex Verus by Benedict Jacker. Oh, Murderbot Diaries was by Martha Wells, by the way. Alex Verus by Benedict Jacker. I read the first book and it was a real slog for me. And even though I enjoyed it, for some reason it felt like a real slog to get through. It was 250 pages and it took me like 3 weeks. So if that tells you anything about that book, it should tell you something about that book. So Alex Verus is a British take on the Dresden Files, kind of. It's something where I did get the second book from the library with the intent to read it, but then a lot of people told me the first book was the best book in the series, and so that really took the wind out of my sails when it came to Alex Verus, and it's why I think I've teetered from going no, maybe, to shelved, to no. Finally, this is an interesting one, which is The Dark Tower by Stephen King. So Stephen King has, since The Dark Tower finished and he wrote the 7th book, released more stuff about The Dark Tower. I currently don't have any interest in reading any more about that. I feel like that series is closed and done for me. And honestly, that's kind of where I want to leave it. I may reread The Dark Tower in, many years' time because I loved reading it. And when I've read more Stephen King, I think it'll be even more fun to read. But currently, no plans to read the other stuff that he's written in that universe. And that is everything. That is all 30 series of books, which is absolutely mad. How have I read 30 book series? Or started 30 book series? And in fact, finished some. And will have finished multiple more in like 2 or 3 months' time because I'm working my way through stuff. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have read any of these series and I've said maybe or shelved or whatever, and you think I should prioritize them, put them in the comments down below. I'm not going to promise anything, but I will definitely give it a shot. If enough people say you have to read Threadlight, maybe I'll push it into the schedule early this year. Or people say Rivers of London, for example. Those are 2 that could be potentially half 1 2024 if enough people love them. If you like this video, please give it a like. If you would like to see more of my videos and you'd like to see more from me, then please subscribe to the channel. Every little subscription helps. We're a third of the way to getting monetized now, which is amazing and mind-blowing. That was like my year 1 goal was to get like 300 subscribers, and we're at 300 in 5 months, which is absolutely incredible. Thank you so much, every single person who subscribes. I really, really appreciate it. And if you haven't subscribed, it's very, very easy to do. Just as you're going down to click that like button and leave a comment, just click the subscribe button. And I will see you tomorrow.